Moments ago, Senate Republicans refused to move forward with a vote that would suspend the nation's debt limit. That's right. Republican senators chose to move us closer to a devastating default to the American people. To be honest, none of this should come as a surprise from a party that is devoid of ideas and preoccupied with deranged lies spewed by Captain Bone Spurs. It should also come as no surprise, given the fact that Republicans seem to care more about cutting corporate taxes than they do about the overall financial well-being of this country. Today's vote would have addressed debts incurred under a Republican Senate, House, and President. During the previous administration, members of both parties voted together to raise or suspend the debt limit 3 times. This is shaping up to be a very busy week on Capitol Hill, with Democrats juggling passage of an infrastructure bill, finalizing a human infrastructure package central to Biden's agenda, and staving off a government shutdown and default. A challenging task made worse by a nihilistic Republican Party that's intent on sabotaging things that are desperately needed, like immigration reform, voting rights, and police reform. Democrats could make these Republicans irrelevant by nuking the filibuster. But here's the problem. There are people on their own side who are standing in the way. I'm looking at you, Senator Sinema and Joe Manchin. That leaves President Biden's agenda trapped between those two competing poles. And with the midterm elections inching closer, Democrats have to wonder if failure is an acceptable outcome. Joining me now, Jason Johnson, professor of journalism and politics at Morgan State University and host of the Slate podcast, A Word with Jason Johnson, and Adrienne Elrod, former senior aide on the Biden-Harris and Clinton-Kaine campaigns. Thank you both for being here. Let me play you Joe Biden, because, you know, if there's one thing about Joe Biden, he's Mr. Optimistic. Here he is.
Any progress on a reconciliation deal today, Mr. President? How close do you think you are?
You know me, I'm more an optimist. I think things are going to go well. I think we're going to get it done. And but I have meetings tonight, tomorrow, and for the next little bit.
I already know Jason is my fellow pessimist. I'm going to give you a shot on this one, Adrienne. Is that optimism realistic? I mean, Democrats have not gotten through police reform, which Tim Scott has already turned against his own reform ideas. They couldn't get through voting rights. The Voting Act, the VRA is basically dead on a stretcher. They are now barely going to squeak through maybe on infrastructure, and they can't get their big human infrastructure bill. What's with the optimism?
Well, look, I think we're lucky that our president is inherently optimistic, especially compared to his predecessor. But look, Joy, I mean, there's a lot of work that's got to be done. And here are the things that we know. We know that, number one, Democrats are going to have to rely on each other to pass this agenda. We're not going to get any Republicans. We're certainly not going to get any Republicans when it comes to voting rights. So we're really going to have to rely on each other. What does that mean? We're going to have to figure out how to make a deal. And that is what, you know, what Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are working on right now. How do we actually get this legislation through, the Build Back Better agenda through with our own caucus? And I got to tell you, you look at where we are on the Build Back Better Act compared to where we were 10, 11 years ago when we were passing the Affordable Health Care Act. I was the chief of staff in Congress at the time. That was a very difficult piece of legislation to get through because it was widely unpopular. This is actually a very popular bill. I mean, of course, the ACA became popular after it was passed and people realized the benefits that this legislation provided for them. But this is totally different. And that's why I think it's frustrating to see some of the moderates in our very own caucus, stifle the progress here. I'm telling you, you tell me who in some of these moderates districts is going to say, I don't want my prescription drug costs lowered. I don't want to expand child care access. I don't want to expand or even provide paid leave for all. These are very popular policies that are part of this act. And I do believe at the end of the day, Joy, this is going to get done, but it may not happen quite as fast as we initially had hoped for.
Well, I mean, who in their districts? Maybe nobody in their districts, but their donors, maybe. These 9 moderates are still calling, they want their bill, the bill they like, to pass. There's 9 moderate Democrats who are saying, no, pass our bill that we like. There's no guarantee that progressives have gotten that if they do that, they'll get anything in return. Pramila Jayapal, Katie Porter, Ilhan Omar, and others wrote a letter saying Congress now faces a choice: advance the entirety of an agenda that gets American families the help they need, or deliver only a fraction of it. That's why we as leaders of the Congressional Progressive Caucus remain committed to voting for the infrastructure bill only after the Build Back Better Act is passed. Cue Joe Manchin, sounding a lot like a Republican. Here he is.
In a nutshell, we need to be looking at, are we moving more to a social social refinement, if you will. And I'm concerned about basically a society moving towards more of an entitlement mentality versus a rewarding mentality.
An entitlement mentality. That sounds like 80s Reaganism, Jason. The $3.5 trillion reconciliation package that Joe Manchin is calling entitlement mentality. Half of people favor it, only 25% oppose it. Your thoughts?
The vast majority of people want it. It's spread out over 10 years. We want to talk about entitlement. We shouldn't talk about him and his family and the benefits that he and his wife and his daughter have gotten from all sorts of government deals. We're going to talk about that sort of level of entitlement. But here's the problem here. Joe Manchin has been allowed to be this guy, and Kristen Sinema have been allowed to be this person for months. And you have President Biden out there doing this halftime coach speech. We can rally together. Look, you're down 37-3, okay? There's not that much time left in the game, and you've let your quarterback run around the whole time like he's running the game and not throw to anybody. That is what we have going on right now. The Progressive Caucus is saying we are tired of falling for the banana in the tailpipe. Okay, we keep voting for things, and then they get to the Senate and they go nowhere. We're tired of it. We actually have to show something to our constituents next year. And here's where I think the real problem is. Like I said, I think the debt ceiling is probably going to get fixed. But when we talk about the human infrastructure bill, when we talk about the plane infrastructure bill, if these things don't get passed by the end of the year, by like Thanksgiving time when everybody's getting together with their family and having discussions, you're not going to get it passed next year. And no one is going to go out and vote next year under voter suppressive circumstances for a Democratic Party that says, send us some new reinforcements and then we'll actually do the things that we ran on. They have to show they can get something done with this level of power, or nobody has the incentive to give them more power after next year's elections.
Adrian, that's the problem, right? I mean, Dianne Feinstein, too, put her in that list. I think she voted no on the bill today. How do Democrats go back to voters, particularly voters of color, in 2022 and say, okay, see what happened was we couldn't get you voting rights, infrastructure, human infrastructure. We really couldn't get you anything because Joe Manchin said we couldn't. That's not really a platform when people can barely get to vote at all.
That's correct, Joy. And I think the bottom line is we're not going to, because we've got to get these things passed. And if that means we reform the filibuster or we amend it on certain pieces of legislation like voting rights, we have to do that. I think President Biden knows that. Look, he wants to go into the midterms with some wins under his belt, but he also made promises to the American people that he's got to deliver on, and he knows that. So however this approach happens, I think Jason's right. This may not happen in the next week. It may not happen in the next 10 days. But I think you will see some progress made over the course of at least the next 2 months, I would think, because members of Congress, especially a lot of these moderates, they don't want to have to go home and face their constituents who say to them, we elected you to deliver on the Biden agenda. Biden received more votes than any other candidate running for president in the United States history. So his agenda is something that is supported by the majority of the American people. And these guys don't want to go home and hear from their constituents time and time again. Why didn't you give me paid leave? Why didn't you expand my child care? You know, the things that are in this bill, the components of the Build Back Better Act, are tangible components that the American people desperately need. We've also got to keep in mind, Joy, and you know this very well, we had essentially no progress under Donald Trump on anything. The only thing he passed was a tax cut for the ultra wealthy and for the corporations. So we've got a lot of work to be done. And by the way, this bill is paid for. That's the other thing that's so frustrating to me to see that, you know, people talk about the cost. It's paid for over 10 years. So,
but see, that's the other thing.
I do think we'll get some progress.
Right. We always talk about the pay-fors rather than what it does, right, on the Democratic side. Let's play the big gun has come in. President Obama is weighed in on the Build Back Better Act. Take a listen.
When you look at the overall package, you know, it's got a headline price tag of $3.5 trillion, but that's not a single year. This is spread out over a number of years. And most importantly, it's paid for by asking the wealthiest of Americans who have benefited incredibly over the last several decades, and even in the midst of a pandemic, saw their wealth and assets rise enormously, asking them to pay a few percentage points more in taxes in order to make sure that we have an economy that's fair for everybody.
Jason, and kudos to Robin Roberts scoring that interview. I would like to believe that was enough to move minds and hearts. It might have been in like 2009. I don't know if it is today.
Right.
I feel like the base is done, done. If Democrats can't deliver anything, I don't care what Obama says. That's just my cynical opinion. Your thoughts?
So back in 2009, there was this great show that was called The Closer, right? And that's when Obama was the closer. Like, he could come in and he could give a great speech like Kara Sedgwick, and everybody say, oh, my God, we love him, and then it would work, right? But see, we're not there now. People were very angry at him. I think one of the things that we have realized in this is that the former President Obama getting health care through and the stimulus package is really amazing when you look at it in contrast with what's happening today. But here's the problem, Joy. It's like you have so many people who are dead set in their positions who, rather than seeing the circumstances of, you know, a slow-moving coup and a pandemic that has ravaged the American economy and it still continues to stress people out, they're still fighting as if it is 2009. They still think these are arguments that they can go and work out in retail politics, and we're no longer there politically. And I have to say this because this is important. For the Democrats who say we shouldn't have to play at this line, you got to bring in reinforcements, which means passing the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. The only reason that you can keep people from Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin from having this kind of power is if you allow the voters to actually vote and give the Democrats the leads they need so that they don't have to fight at the margins.
I need Democrats to hear that. Well, maybe they will. We'll see. Jason Johnson, Adrian Elrod, you're both great. Thank you very much.